Good morning and welcome to a webinar organized by the Hellenic Foundation for European Foreign Policy, ELIAMEP, and the Istanbul Policy Center, IPC, whose aim is to explore the findings of the fifth wave of the Greek-Turkish joint opinion survey, which were recently released. My name is Ioannis Grigoriadis. I'm an associate professor Jean Monnet Chair in Bilkent University in Ankara, and I'm also a senior fellow at the head of the Turkey program at ELIAMEP. And I have the pleasure to moderate a panel today who's going to look into aspects of Greek-Turkish relations as they appear through the opinions of Greeks and Turks who were asked by us, ELIAMEP and IPC, in July. This program is supported by diaNEOsis and is also realized with the help of two leading research survey companies in Greece and Turkey, MRB and Conda. And we have been running this service for some time now. So this is the fifth wave. So we have an interesting position because we can compare the views of the public over a period of 2 or 3 years, in which period Greek-Turkish relations have changed a lot. So this is going to be one of the topics to discuss today. I'm very happy to be joined by a very, very distinguished panel. We have Evangelos Areteos, research associate in the Turkey program at ELIAMEP and a journalist. We have Professor Senem Aydin-Düzgit, who is a research and academic affairs coordinator in the Istanbul Policy Center and a professor at Sabancı University. We have Professor Evren Balta, who is teaching international relations as professor at Özyeğin University at the Faculty of Social Sciences. And we have Professor Dimitar Bechev, who is a visiting scholar at Carnegie Europe and a lecturer at the School of Global and Area Studies at the University of Oxford. And he's also a senior research fellow with the Southeast Europe program at ELIAMEP. We have allocated certain topics that the fifth wave has covered. So I will first give the floor to Mr. Areteos, who is going to discuss the question of trust in the relations between Greeks, Turks, and their respective governments. Then I will give the floor to Professor Balta, who will go on to discuss personal and country estimates, how Greeks and Turks look into their future and to the future of their country. Then I will be covering topics related to earthquake, diplomacy, and disaster response, given the fact that the two countries have experienced devastating natural catastrophes, and this is considered to be a parameter to be explored and discussed. Then Senem will explore the topic of bilateral relations and foreign policy in light of recent developments. And then I will give the floor to Dimitar to discuss what we've already presented and maybe add a couple of questions or important points. Then we will move into a Q&A session whereby we look forward to questions and comments from the audience. Please feel free to send your questions through the channels that have already been identified on the media releases related to the event. So I'll first give the floor to Vangelis.
Thank you very much, Ioannis. Thank you all. What we've seen in this fifth wave is a sort of parallel dynamic between Greece and Turkey in a sort of ongoing weakening of trust to democratic institutions in both countries, and especially the elected ones. What is very interesting, first of all, is that both in Greece and Turkey, there is a very high trust in the military. Actually, the military in both countries is the public institution with the highest trust rate in both countries. So in Greece, for example, we have 72.1% of the people who trust the Greek army, and for the Turks, the rate is almost the same, is 70.4. But what we've seen here the last period in Greece is a terrible chain of disasters. We had a very big train accident that cost the life of almost 100 Greek citizens. We had wildfires, and later we had the floods. Of course, the floods were not came later, so we cannot see exactly this reflected in this fifth wave. But already we've seen that because of all these disasters, the trust of the Greek citizens towards the army goes high in the last years. And the same we've seen in Turkey for different reasons, of course. We cannot compare, but still the military is the most trusted institution. And what is very interesting is that in the past, the trust of the Greeks towards the military was still high, but not that high. But we've seen that this dynamic of increasing trust is ongoing. So then we have the big trust. Also, the second in trust comes the police forces in both countries, which is also very interesting because in both countries the police sometimes has shown some symptoms of very shady relationship with politics, and sometimes, especially in Greece, we've seen some difficulties in how the police reacts to different events. But still, the trust is high in both countries. And then we have the trust in the elected institutions, which is still problematic, we can say, because it is in both countries quite low. So, for example, we have the trust in the Prime Minister in Greece, 42.5%. And the trust in the president in Turkey, 33.9%. So these are rather low rates for both the most important institutions, and the same goes, and even lower for the parliaments in both countries. In Turkey, the trust in parliament is really low. It's at 21.9, and this can also be explained by the constitutional system and the official and institutional decrease of the role of the parliament. But in Greece we don't have this kind of system. But still, the trust in the Greek parliament is very low. It's 34.9%. The difference, one difference would be the trust in the justice system, where in Greece it's quite high. It's the third from above after the police. It's at 45.7%, whereas in Turkey is really lower. It's at 27.4%. And also we have seen the last long period in Turkey a quite problematic image of the justice system there. What is really worrying again is the very, very low trust in both countries to the media. In Greece, it's 18.7%, and in Turkey is 11.3%. And in both countries, the trust in the media is the lowest in our list. And this is a problem, because without trust in the media, it is very difficult for to have sane politics and to have a transparent public discussion in many issues. So what we've seen overall is that although the dynamics are different in Greece and Turkey, the overall dynamics is a sort of strengthening of populism, and also this mistrust in elected institutions and democratic institutions, which is becoming a rather problematic situation in both countries. And it is also rather interesting, I would say even worrying, this high trust in the military, although we can understand that it is not, of course, something that replaces the democratic institutions. It's not that the people would prefer, of course, that the army, the military governs the country, but this too high trust in the military comparing to the elected institutions is also a symptom of the general malaise both in Greece and Turkey. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vangelis. You raised some very important issues. I won't be asking any questions now, as we have to follow the schedule, and then we have opportunity to raise some of the very important issues you've touched upon. I'll now give the floor to Evren.
Sure. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's an honor to be here again for the fifth time. We have been together since 2021, I guess, for the last 3 years, and we have been following the trends in many aspects in both countries. This has been a really great learning experience in terms of how the trends are changing, not just looking to Turkey, but also looking to Greece and comparing these two countries. I'm going to share my slides with you now. Let me do the, sorry. I hope you can see this. Okay, so this is not related to our survey, but I also checked whether the optimism and happiness index in Greece and Turkey reflected as we did the similar trends are reflected in the World Happiness Report as well, to look at the broader trends. And the World Happiness Report actually looks at 6 indicators. In many countries, it's economic well-being, social support, either welfare or family, life expectancy, freedom to make life choices, trust in government and institutions, which Vangelis just covered, and generosity. But when we look at both countries, compare these two countries based on these 6 indicators, and look at this year's report, we see that Greece is on the 58th. Greece's place is the 58th in the World Happiness Report, and Turkey is downgrading continuously and significantly in this report. Now is, as you can see here, its score is 4.6, and it's the 106th in the World Happiness Report. Okay, what we see in our survey, we asked both to our respondents their evaluation of the country that they live in, either Greece and Turkey, and ask them whether things are going in their country in general. And we then ask the financial situation, the perception of their financial situation. Usually we didn't ask in these questions what their future expectations are. So we are basically focusing on the expectations, not their evaluation of the past, which are actually not separable, but the question specifically, basically, about the future. So this is the graph about in the last round of the survey. Here you can see Turkey scores. The respondents in Turkey say that the things are not going in our country well. 76.7% of respondents, Turkish respondents, think that things are not going well at all in Turkey, as opposed to 54.4% respondents in Greece. So this is for both countries a high score actually, but it's much higher in Turkey. But let me show you the trend now. There is not much optimism, as you can see from these figures as well. But the trend shows us a different picture when we compare Turkey and Greece. So when we started this survey in 2021, the difference between Turkey and Greece was not that high. It was around 10%. 10% higher for Turkey than for Greek respondents. 62.5 respondents in Turkey thought that the situation is not going well in Turkey, as opposed to 52% in Greece in 2021. But 2 years after, as you can see the trend, it's almost 80% in Turkey that the respondents are thinking that things are not going well. So in Greece, it remained pretty stable, around 50%. It got worse in 2022, but then began to decline. But in Turkey, it began to decline in 2022, but then right now it's really high. As we measured, it was in 2022, it was 80%, but so you can see that there's a big difference between Greece and Turkey in terms of optimism. Here is the question, our question about the financial situation. The first part was about the general situation of the country. The second part is about the financial situation. Here we see the same trend. The respondents in Turkey, their perception gets worse and worse in the last 2 years. And in Greece, it remains stable and even got better in the last year. Right now, when we ask whether your financial situation, whether you expect that your financial situation will improve in the next year or so, Turkish respondents think that 70% of the Turkish respondents think that it will worsen significantly, as opposed to 50% of the Greek respondents. But when we look at the trends, what we see here is that, Greek respondents, look at 2021, started much worse than Turkey. This is different than the general well-being of the country, in which Greek respondents was a bit better. Their optimism was a bit better than Turkish respondents. But in terms of the financial situation, Greek respondents started worse, but it improved. We see a decline in 2022, but now it's 49.1. So we have sort of an improvement. When we look at Turkey, the Turkish respondents' basically perception of their financial situation was much better than the Greek respondents in 2021, but now it's around 70%. So it got worsened significantly as well. So the optimism, if we have an optimism index, we don't have an optimism index, but when we look at the perceptions in terms of general well-being of the country, in terms of the economy, in terms of personal financial situation, we have that as well, personal financial situation. We see that the Turkish respondents are much less optimistic than the Greek respondents in every aspect, and specifically in economy, where Greek respondents started less optimistic, but becoming more optimistic in terms of the economic situation and their financial economic situation as well. This is the difference. This is the pattern of personal financial situation. The rates, when we the figures here are a bit better than the general financial situation of the country. But here again, we see that in the last 2 years, the perceptions and expectations of the Turkish respondents got much less optimistic, as opposed to Greek respondents, where they started from, they also, but the difference is much higher in Turkey. So the Greek respondents here is that they started that their financial situation will worsen a little. In 2021, around 34% thought that it will worsen significantly, but right now it's around 40%. And Turkey, there's much less optimism in terms of personal financial situation as well. So this is what let me stop share. this is what I want to tell. I mean, basically, the optimism or the perceptions about future, as we see in the last elections in Turkey, shapes political patterns, attitudes, behaviors. We see that people, when they are voting, they do not vote only on the basis of what they have been going through, but they also vote on the basis of what they are expecting. And the trend in Turkey is that it gets the belief in the future, both in terms of financial situation and the general conditions of the country, is getting much worse. But we don't see that pattern is basically reflected in the electoral in the voting behavior as well. We may discuss this in the Q&A, why it didn't happen, but we have some breakdown of the data where we see partisanship, both in the case of Turkey and in the case of Greece, really plays a lot in terms of perceptions as well. We don't see a lot of age playing into this difference. Or gender playing into this difference, but we see that the political attitudes in Turkey, it's basically government and opposition, and in Greece, left and right axis really makes a difference in terms of the perceptions, in terms of the perceptions of our respondents. So I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Evren, for this presentation. I will now follow up with a couple of points that focus on the bilateral side of Greek-Turkish relations. What is important to state from the beginning is that since we've been running these surveys for some time now, we've been following the ups and downs of Greek-Turkish relations from the angle of the public opinion. Greek-Turkish relations suffered some low points in the recent years. And what was interesting to observe was that the Greek and Turkish public opinion did not necessarily follow the positions of the officials. The statements and the climate on the statements between the two foreign ministers were not really influencing the views of the Greek and Turkish public opinion. We would witness some slight deterioration over the surveys from second to third to fourth survey, but definitely not in parallel to the discussion and the kind of points made by the two countries against each other. What was interesting with the latest survey is that it was organized in the aftermath of a new turn in Greek-Turkish relations, which was linked with the devastating earthquakes that hit South Turkey and southeastern Turkey in February. These earthquakes, similar to some degree to the earthquakes of 1999, the earthquakes that hit Istanbul, Izmir, and Athens a few weeks later, gave an opportunity for an outpour of solidarity between the two societies that proved to be, in the case of the late 1990s, a departure point for a reconsideration of the bilateral relationship. So what we tried to do in this survey was to investigate the possibility whether something similar may happen now in Greek-Turkish relations. Because the relationship had suffered by increasing tension and sort of confrontation on multiple levels. So we wanted to look into how the public looked into these devastating events and whether they would consider this as a vantage point for a reconsideration of the bilateral relationship. And the results we got were actually supporting this position. Let me also share some of the slides we have for this. We have asked a couple of questions for whether the Greek and Turkish public opinion believes that the Greek contribution to the relief efforts in the February earthquake is going to contribute to the improvement of Greek-Turkish relations. We see here a sort of a slight majority in both countries claiming that it's going definitely to agree. This position is affected by the ideological affiliation of the people asked. So we see that the more to the left, the more likely is to give a positive answer compared to the right of the political spectrum. What is interesting also is important to highlight that there was also a perception that Greek disaster relief efforts in 1999 and Turkish contribution to the Greek relief efforts in 1999 contributed to the improvement of Greek-Turkish relations. So the people recognize a window of opportunity, which, as we now know, both countries try to capitalize upon, because ever since we were planning this fifth wave, there have been two meetings between the leaders of the two countries, one in Vilnius and one recently in New York. And there is a serious concerted effort to consolidate the detente in the bilateral relations and possibly even find some new areas for cooperation. Some of the topics that were frozen for many years because of the difficulties in the bilateral relations are now taken into consideration. There is an announcement about a High Strategic Council meeting in Thessaloniki that is going to be organized with the participation of both leaders in December. And there is a big discussion about the positive agenda, including questions like on migration. So what we see in our findings is that the public supports this. While the public remained neutral or slightly positive in terms of rapprochement efforts, at the time when relations were bitter and kind of acerbic, we now see that the public is actually facilitating, is going to support any efforts in the direction of consolidating the detente and moving ahead with conflict resolution efforts. And in that respect, disaster response appears to be an interesting area of potential cooperation. Because as we witnessed in recent weeks and recent months, unfortunately, our region has suffered major blows by natural catastrophes linked to the climate crisis. I refer to forest fires, I refer to floods. And in that respect, this creates an opportunity for potential cooperation. Both Greeks and Turks agree with a wide majority that the two countries should come to help each other in periods of disaster. We have more than 80% of Greeks and Turks that answer to this on the positive. And they also agree with a very strong majority, again, that the two countries should coordinate their response and relief efforts for future disasters. And this, of course, creates a very interesting field of potential cooperation, like developing common mechanism structures and units which can be specialized in order to address the emergencies that our region is going to face in light of the climate crisis that we have been witnessing already, unfortunately. So this is something that the public appears to be very happy to support. What is also interesting is that both countries' public opinions do not appear very confident with their ability of their states to address these challenges. So a majority of Greeks and Turks are not confident that Greece and Turkey is going to be in a position to overcome the devastating effects of natural disasters. This point, of course, is very well resonating with Vangelis' presentation about the question of trust. So there is, again, weak trust or lack of trust in terms of state capacity, considering, of course, the unprecedented dimensions of the events that we were witnessing in the recent past. But of course, we may be having to adapt to a new reality in terms of natural catastrophes in the Mediterranean, given the fact that the Mediterranean is becoming a hotspot of the climate crisis. So the Greeks and Turks appear not to be trusting their governments and their states when it comes to disaster relief response. Both Greeks and Turks also highlight that their countries remain unprepared for major disasters. And consider that we asked this question in July, so these figures might be even higher, at least in Greece, given the fact that there were major catastrophes that hit the country. And there's a lot of discussion about the state response and the efficiency of the state mechanisms in addressing these issues. Of course, all this generates an opportunity for cooperation. And that's the point I would like to highlight in the end of my short presentation. The two public opinions appear ready to endorse any initiatives that highlight cooperation in the field of natural disaster response, taking preemptive measures, trying to provide immediate relief to victims. And this appears to be a crucial element for a process whereby confidence is going to be built between the two countries. So confidence building measures, which is something that's going to be discussed in detail in the following weeks, following the meetings of the two leaders, can start with emphasis on natural disasters response and the understanding, of course, that the two countries are bound by geography, and this bond needs to be used in a way that both the peoples of Greece and Turkey benefit from a better disaster response mechanism, which capitalizes on the capacities of both countries. So I'll stop here, and I'll now give the floor to Senem, who's going to look into bilateral relations and foreign policy.
Thank you very much, Ioannis, and I agree, it's an honor to be here, and I'm very happy to be talking again on the Greek-Turkish relationship, which, you know, we had been looking at these public perceptions on both sides for quite a while now. So it's also good to see the ebbs and flows which characterize this relationship over the past years. Now, what I'm going to talk a bit more about is bilateral perceptions, especially concerning foreign policy. In other words, what the Greek and the Turkish public think about their respective governments' foreign policies, how they relate to one another. You know, do they think there is any scope for cooperation, or do they accept conflict to be the pervasive theme in the relationship? So those are the kind of questions that we also look into in this public opinion survey, and that we have looked into in the past. Now, zooming in on the public perceptions here, we see that almost half of the public, so that's almost majority in both countries, still think that there is further scope for cooperation there, and that there should be an improvement in the bilateral relationship. I think this is important because it goes to show that there is still space, societal space there, which, you know, both governments can build on for trust, and also for better policies, or to improve at least their policies towards one another. So there would be public backing, both on the Turkish side and the Greek side. Now, having said that, looking at a bit more specific topics that happened recently in between the two public opinion polls, we've had, of course, the Turkish elections, right? The presidential and parliamentary elections that we've had in spring. And we see that in both Greece and Turkey, the Turkish elections are not seen as contributing to the improvement of the relations on both sides. In other words, the victory of AKP and Erdogan in the Turkish elections are seen as a factor that will not be conducive to a more positive relationship between Turkey and Greece in the coming days and months ahead. Now, especially in Greece, there seems to be this perception, or increasing perception, that the AKP win will worsen the relationship and not necessarily improve it. And of course, one can understand where that perception is coming from, given that there has been a lot of controversy and conflict in the relationship, particularly in the Eastern Mediterranean, over the years in which the AKP was in government, obviously, in the last years of that conflict. Now, Ioannis, you rightly mentioned the earthquake, and that there was a sort of a space that was opened, just like it had opened in the late 1990s with an earthquake diplomacy. Having said that, this major disaster in Turkey does not seem to have shifted the perceptions on both sides regarding whether the earthquake has actually changed anything, right? So I'm not, of course, here referring to whether the earthquake has led to increasing sympathy or the rise for solidarity, which I assume it has, but in terms of whether the public thinks that it has changed anything concerning the bilateral relationship, concerning the central government's policies towards one another, I would say that the overwhelming perception is that it hasn't, right? Or that it won't really fundamentally, play a role in the settlement of the existing disputes between the two sides. Now, having said that, of course, those who believe, again, when you look at both sides, that you see that, both sides, there seems to be more people, or the percentage of people who think that their governments are in the right when it comes to these bilateral conflicts are more than those who think that they're not. But neither of those constitute a majority, right? So there seems to be more or less a balance there to some extent. But of course, when we look at the last two periods of the public opinion polls that we've looked at, we see that there has been an increase in the percentage of those on both sides that believe that their governments are in the right, concerning this divisive policies. If you look at the past year, you see that there seems to be more or less stability between November, July, and also in the previous surveys that we've done, in terms of the percentage of the public, the portion of the public who believe that the differences between the two sides are very serious, and thus that are just very difficult to reconcile. Here we're looking at, percentage points of around 60% or even more in some cases. But of course, when it comes to how those disputes should be resolved, there doesn't seem to be a major time-based difference on how people think that they should be resolved regarding in Greece and in Turkey. Whereas in Greece, the dominant perception as that these disputes should be resolved within the context of international organizations. Of course, the European Union is the first one that comes to mind. Whereas for Turkish public opinion, there seems to be more emphasis on diplomacy and political relations, etc. Now, of course, that also is not very surprising, since in Turkey, international organizations, but in particular the European Union, is perceived as a party to the conflicts that already exist between Turkey and Greece and Cyprus. And so, the overwhelming perception is that these international organizations cannot really be an objective arbiter in the conflicts and regulating the conflicts between the two sides. Whereas in Greece, you just have the opposite opinion, partly because of the same reason, as Greece is already a member of the EU along with Cyprus, etc., that the idea is that this is a better site to resolve the conflicts. Perhaps on a more positive note, and I'd like to end on a positive note here, is that, as we've been doing these surveys, the last couple of years, we've had times in which there was the possibility, at least, the military conflict, and so there was escalation of conflict, again, particularly in the Eastern Med. Whereas when we look at the most recent public opinion poll, which we've done here, we see that this concern over a potential or possible military incident has substantially decreased, or the perception that there will be a military conflict, a concrete military conflict at some point, that perception seems to have subsided down significantly over the past year. In other words, people seem to be less worried that the two sides will at least go to war or to engage in real concrete military conflict in the near future. And I think that goes parallel to the easing of tensions in the Eastern Mediterranean, of course, over the past year. So we can't sort of interpret this independent of that reality on the ground. So I'll just stop here. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Senem, for this very insightful comments. I'll now give the floor to Dimitar, who's going to wrap up and provide some discussion points. And thank you.
Sorry, just wanted to remove my microphone. I've been put on the spot because Senem basically said whatever I meant to say about the implications of the survey. But as a general point, looking at the broad sweep of Greek-Turkish relations, it seems to me that the result basically proves that it's often directed from the leadership. So public opinion follows the mood of the day and doesn't really constrain leaders. And now, of course, in Turkish foreign policy, we have a period of resets since around 2021. In Greece, could be seen as in this wider set of cases, and unsurprisingly, attitudes to a rapprochement with Greece are quite forthcoming. So that's number one. What does it mean? I think in case there is a serious initiative to engage on the thorny issues, say on confidence building measures in the Aegean, which is very likely given the two meetings first at the level of foreign ministers and now at the UN General Assembly at the level of national leaders, there'll be enough popular support, which in the Turkish case is not that difficult to arrange given the extensive impact of the government on the public sphere and how you frame political issues. But still, it's something important to bear in mind that it seems to me, given what the survey suggests, the political environment is benign. Secondly, and this is a question more than a statement on my part and kind of connects to what Ioannis said, there is this living memory of engagement post-earthquake and of a period of extended rapprochement. So could it be that in 2018, when things went south and deteriorated, our assumption that we were back to point zero, to square zero, that was a flawed assumption. In other words, there was enough already momentum that stayed there and could be revived with all the caveats. I mean, I don't mean there'll be a big breakthrough in Greek-Turkish relations, but eventually societies have matured and they see potential and not just the usual 1970s, 1980s style enemy image on the other side. So that was my thinking, you know, in this record of negotiations of positive interdependence and the rest gone, or you could basically fall back on it and bring back some of it. But again, I think maybe it's my disciplinary attitudes, and many of us come from the same field. But again, I think it's very often the leadership setting the tone and society following, rather than society putting pressure on leadership to do X, Y, and Z. In the Turkish case, against the last thing I'm going to say, by way of diversion, on even more controversial issues, you see how civil society groups have failed to influence policy. I mean, the Russian policy would be one example. Even in the 90s, when Caucasus Slavics, Chechens, and other migrant groups or Tatars have failed to impact on Turkish foreign policy. So this autonomy of political leadership is very, very important. And this is good because if we assume that there'll be a process of cautious rapprochement, that will play at the level of the grassroots as well. So that's my take on the data, and I'm looking forward to what you guys think.
Thank you very much, Dimitar, for your comments and points. Let me highlight something important that you raised. I do agree that this concept of autonomous leadership is crucial in that respect, and the fact that leaders can put forward an agenda. What is the opportunity now, maybe, is that both leaders in Greece and Turkey have recently won elections, so they enjoy reinforced legitimacy, and this can give them the opportunity to enter more controversial or sensitive territory when they are going to make decisions or take certain initiatives. But of course, this is a narrowing window of opportunity. This is not going to stay for long. So in a sense, for many weeks and months, We were aware that the election campaign in both Greece and Turkey was a difficult environment for initiatives of this sort to flourish. So there were a lot of concerns about how worse the bilateral relations could become in light of this, but eventually, and with the unexpected, of course, development of the earthquake, we witnessed a sort of a calming down of the relationship until the elections in both countries, and now we may be having a new opportunity. But this, of course, requires leadership. But we do know from the survey, and I think that's very important, that the public is not going to be actively against this. Actually, the public in principle supports the idea. How, of course, this is going to develop and whether there would be pitfalls or sort of or accidents along that path is another big discussion. And of course, that's why these efforts and steps should be carefully prepared and sort of planned in collaboration of the two foreign services. We have a couple of questions I would like to share with you. Feel free to send us questions through the email events@eliamep.gr or through social media so I can communicate them to the speakers. There is a question that refers to Evren and Vangelis about young generations and their willingness to immigrate abroad. Is there any finding in the survey that supports this? So this pessimism or this sort of low trust, does it transform into willingness to emigrate? Evren?
We haven't asked a question related to immigration or decision to immigrate to a different country. So in none of these surveys. So I don't know specifically, but breaking down the optimism scale in terms of the financial situation, both personal financial situation and expectations about the future of the economy. What we see is that the perceptions of the middle-aged groups, people who are between 30 and 45, is they're much less optimistic. And this is, I mean, much less optimistic than the younger generations. Probably this is related to the fact that these are already in households, are responsible from the well-being of the household as well, adults in an economic crisis situation, specifically in Turkey. But when we come to much older generations and younger generations, their expectations still, I mean, not well, but as compared to this middle-aged groups, they seem a bit more optimistic.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Vangeli. Can you unmute, please?
I'm sorry. What we've seen concerning the trust in institutions is that, first of all, concerning the trust to the military and the police, the more we go lower in age, the less is the trust. So trust to the military and to the police increases with age. And we see also that when it comes to the prime minister in the case of Greece, we see the same trend, meaning that the younger generations tend to trust less the prime minister and the parliament than the older generations. What is also interesting here to say is that we, back in November 22, we have done in this previous wave, we had asked some similar questions, more or less, concerning how proud people feel about the military and everything. And we've seen the same trends, meaning that the younger generations tend to be less impressed and less to give less their trust to the military than the older generations. But still, overall, the difference is still significant between the trust the young generations give to the military and the trust to the elected institutions. So we can see that the picture when it comes to the perception of the younger generations towards the elected institutions is not very positive, which might be one factor of potential immigration.
Thank you very much, Vangeli. We have another question, which is for Sanem and me, regarding the role of the Cyprus problem. So, is Cyprus going to be an obstacle to the kind of consolidation of the steps taken, or can we consider that Cyprus is not going to have a major impact on this? Sanem, would you like to start?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I guess if there is a will to go forward, I don't expect, Cyprus to create an extra impediment than what already exists out there with the persistence of the frozen conflict. But of course, the Cyprus conflict will be there. And depending on changes in Turkish foreign policy in the wider region, it can become an extra impediment or not. So that's what I would say. I don't know if you'd agree.
But... To follow up, in principle, I agree with you. I do think that the Cyprus problem was linked to some parameters that led to the sharp deterioration of Greek-Turkish relations a few years ago. And I think that the two countries now appear willing to put it aside and put emphasis on their bilateral relationship. This is not meaning that Cyprus is not important. Cyprus remains very important for EU-Turkey relations and Greek-Turkish relations. But there is some willingness on both sides to go ahead with a positive agenda, regardless of whether there are progress steps on the side of the Cyprus problem. There was some discussion recently about the possibility of a new initiative taken by the UN Secretary General so that the peace process becomes revived. As we now know, this was not enough. There was not sufficient support on the side of the parties, particularly Turkish Cypriots and Turkey, to the extent that Turkey appeared committed to the two-state solution, which is a non-starter for Greece and the Republic of Cyprus, and for the international community as well. But I do think that things will move on regardless of whether there is a peace process in Cyprus or not. Of course, if there is one new initiative in Cyprus, this can only make things better. This is not to say that it's unimportant. It is very important, but it's not going to be a veto element into the future steps of the rapprochement.
May I add something?
Yes, of course, Owen.
When we started the survey in 2021, we asked the Cyprus question and we kept asking. It's not in this survey, but we, in 3 rounds, I guess, we asked to the respondents which problem is the most important problem between Turkey and Greece, kind of a question. We wanted them to basically point out 3 major problems between Turkey and Greece, or the most important problems according to their opinion between Turkey and Greece. And in the first 2 rounds or 3 rounds, we kept asking the same question. And the Cyprus was one of the, according to the respondents, was not a major problem at all. So it always, maybe 10 or 2%, between 2 and 10% of the respondents, I don't remember exactly the figures, thought that Cyprus is among the top 3 problems between Turkey and Greece. And initially, when we were discussing this, the consensus among us that Cyprus basically lost its importance in bilateral relations. But as Dimitar said, the public opinion really responds to the political statements and the political discourses of the politicians as well. As Cyprus is now becoming, in the last year, more important in the political discourses of the politicians, and also more important in terms of the ELIAMEP problems. We didn't ask specifically this question again, but we could assume that it's becoming in the list of the respondents more important. But initially it wasn't important. I mean, none of the respondents, almost, it was a very, very small percentage who thought that Cyprus was an important problem.
Thank you very much, Evren. We have a question by Barçın Yinanç, which is addressed to, based on the content, maybe Dimitar and Sanem. Is anyone convinced Greece can play a positive role in the improvement of EU-Turkey relations? Or Greece is trying to kind of keep Turkey outside? So this, of course, reflects on the discussion we had about rapprochement in 1999, right? Where Greece decided to change its strategy on EU-Turkey relations and support the improvement of EU-Turkey relations because it considered this to be an important element of its own engagement strategy with Turkey. So Turkey, which is closer to the European Union, is going to be a better neighbor and a neighbor with whom an agreement can be made. Can we see any elements of this thinking at the moment, Dimitar?
Well, I suppose you're much better qualified to comment on this one than I am, for the fact that you used it in Athens. Or you're in Turkey most of the time, but let's say symbolically sit in Athens. But yeah, I don't think there is a fundamental reassessment of the Greek position. And because the conditions are not there, I mean, we are not in a moment of view expansion that could provide the overreaching framework. The way I read Mitsotakis' foreign policy is that you want to have a backstop, which is obviously one, the EU, but also the strategic relationship developed with the likes of France and the US, which provides you with enough leverage or bargaining strength to engage with Turkey from a position of relative strength, although it cannot be fully symmetrical because of the power differential. So yeah, I think it's a different dynamic. It's not as benign as we were there before, but the world has moved on, and it's hard to reproduce the sort of conditions we worked under some 25 years ago.
True. Sanem, any thoughts?
Yes, I mean, I agree with Dimitar. I think relations with Turkey and the EU hinge on so many different factors right now, and there's at such a low point in any case that I don't think any bilateral pickup of improvement of relations between Turkey and Greece would make a huge substantial impact, because I think that relationship is beyond the Turkey-Greek-Cypriot relationship right now, as it's a relationship that's often discussed and shaped by developments that are outside the context of enlargement and enlargement policy. So yeah, I wouldn't expect a major
figures there. It's just one individual directing the policy in Ankara. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you know what I mean. So if tomorrow political expediency dictates to Erdogan to take a different course, you can foresee a 180-degree turn. So the relationship is not institutionalized. There are no backstops. There are no guardrails. And therefore it's volatile. And therefore risk remains. It's not that they'll go to war. I think there won't be a military showdown, even at the worst of times. Maybe that's one positive takeaway. But let's be a bit more cautious what we expect to happen in the months to come.
To follow up on your points, since Dimitar suggested that I also take the floor, and I will happily do so, I do think that there is a realignment of the strategic position in Greece and Turkey in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Middle East, which is due to the fact, of course, that Greece, during its financial crisis, had withdrawn from several areas. And this meant that foreign policy was no longer a priority for the government in Athens. Now Greece is making a comeback to certain regions and has developed certain agendas. And in that respect, I think this has to be reconciled with foreign policy in Turkey that used to be very ambitious, maybe over-ambitious, and now has to be readjusted and recalibrated. And in that In these circumstances, one has to consider also the role of the European Union, but without Turkish membership perspective being a discussion point as it was 20 years ago. Today, everybody knows that Turkey is not going to be a member of the European Union in the foreseeable future, but this doesn't mean that there are no important topics to be discussed. There are a lot of important issues that influence the politics and policies in the European Union, in Turkey, in Greece, that need to be discussed. And think of migration, for example, as the very clear and sort of self-evident topic that needs to be put on the table. And actually, there is discussion about negotiations between Greece and Turkey on reaching an agreement on this most sensitive topic. So in that respect, the relationship will have to navigate through these difficulties and also consider the new strategic reality in the region. So, another question for Vangelis. It's more of a question related to Greece. You mentioned this very low trust in institutions, media, parties in Greece. So the question is, can this be one of the reasons for the recent very spectacular election of a new leader in Syriza? The fact that Stefanos Kasselakis managed to win such a strong majority without, or maybe because of he's not part of the political establishment or the media establishment of the country.
Precisely, Ioannis, yes. Actually, what we've seen is a very significant part of the society, mainly, again, the younger generations, who are not apolitical in the sense that they don't care about politics, but they have taken very significant distance from the current political structures, parties, governments, and everything. But that doesn't mean that they don't care about what's going on in the country. So considering this low trust in the current democratic institutions and the media, this Kasselakis phenomenon can be partly explained also by this fact, and by the fact that there is a part of the society that cares about what's going on in the country, but really doesn't trust at all the current political parties and the current structures. And we have seen since months, as I mentioned earlier, a series of tragic disasters in Greece, which show to all of us actually that there are serious gaps in the public structures and in the way the state, no matter who governs it, can cope and can manage these crises. So I think that this phenomenal accession of Kasselakis to the presidency of Syriza yesterday can be partly explained by all that. Yes.
Thank you very much. There is a question for Evren. Evren, you presented a very pessimistic view about the future in both countries, maybe slightly more pessimistic in Turkey than in Greece. On the other hand, the governments in both countries have won comfortable majorities in the recent elections. How can we reconcile this?
As I said, there is a lot of partisanship. When we break down the data in any question, when it comes to trust, this is the same. When it comes to attitudes towards foreign policies of these two countries, it's the same. We see that there are two publics, actually. It's a very polarized public debate in any aspect. And that's true for the optimism as well, and optimism index as well. When we break down the data, as I said, in Turkey, usually the perception of the government supporters of the incumbent government, incumbents, is actually more optimistic when compared to the supporters of the opposition. And it's basically political party identification that really matters in shaping attitudes in every aspect. As we said, gender, education sometimes, age are not as important as partisanship and political party attitudes, and that goes correct for the optimism too. This is one explanation. So you have two completely opposite perceptions about both your own well-being and also about the well-being of the general well-being of the country. And in terms of performance, I mean, when the respondents ask this question to themselves, okay, it's going to go bad, right? The situation of the financial or the general well-being is in the country is going to get worse. But then they ask a second question: who is going to solve the problem? Who's going to perform better? So when you have two options, again, partisanship really plays a lot of role in, getting these majorities. So these two questions are different from each other. You expect that things are going to get worse, but then you ask another question, and that question is, who's going to solve the problem? And then supporters of the government believe to the fact that it's going to be Erdogan's government who's going to be more capable of solving Turkey's problem, who's going to perform better, as opposed to opposition. So pretty much partisanship really shapes, colors the perceptions of the respondents or the Turkish public in general, and the Greek public as well. And in Greek public, it's not the opposition versus government, it's the left-right axis that really shapes perceptions. In general, the more leftist you are, the more pessimistic you are in terms of the financial situation and the general well-being of the country. The more right-leaning you are, if you're more on the right scale of the political scale, then you are more optimistic about the future of the country and also financial well-being, both individually and generally.
No, thank you very much. But I also think, if I may add a point here, that this also tells something about the inability of the opposition parties.
Oh, of course, yes. I mean, yeah, exactly. It's basically the performance perception that really matters. This question, who does better when opposition parties does not generate trust, does not really seem capable to the public that they may be more capable of solving the problems, then specifically more vulnerable groups, low-income groups, and sometimes others, like people who are basically affected from the earthquake directly, as we saw in the last elections, may go with the incumbent government. So vulnerability is also may go and vote for the incumbent government again. Vulnerability is also a factor. The more vulnerable you are, the more likely that you think that things are going to get worse, but then you go and vote for the incumbent government. So it seems not, it seems sort of, like conflicting, but it is not actually.
Thank you very much. We have one last question for Vangelis. You mentioned about the low trust in media that is prevalent in both countries. So can the media play a role in this rapprochement process? Can it be an obstacle? Can it facilitate the government efforts? Where will it stand in a possible realignment of Greek-Turkish relations?
I think that the media overall in both countries, potentially they could play a rather negative role, but if we have more strategic thinking, I'm talking from the Greek side now, because we've seen this back in the early 2000s with the Simitis government, when he decided to do this significant turn towards Turkey. He collaborated very closely with the media, and we have seen at that time that the stance of the major mainstream media in Greece, both left-wing and right-wing, was very positive. Now, today, it's not the same thing, but I think that in the Greek side, we will have some problematic stance from the media, mainly because we see that outside the mainstream media, who are losing also the trust of the people, we have a very big, very significant number of media, both very right-wing or very left-wing, and also we have now today the effect of the social media, which we didn't have back in the 2000s. So my guess would be that the first reaction of the media, if the Greek government wants to really go forward with more courageous steps, would be negative.
Thank you very much, Vangeli. This was the last question we had. Would any of you like to make any final comments before we conclude? Any observations, things we haven't covered?
I found data on immigration. We actually asked the question. I mean, it has been too many questions. I don't remember all of it. This question we asked in 2022, I guess in May, more than a year ago. And it seems that back then, a year ago, the percentage of the Greek respondents who want to leave abroad is almost 50%, more than 50 maybe, but here, let me say, the percentage of the Greek respondents who don't want to leave abroad is around 30%, the same percentage for Turkey, so similar. But when we ask who want to go abroad, where do you want to leave? When we ask this specific question, most of the Greek respondents said that 50% of them said that in a European country. So basically, within European Union, migration kind of thing really shapes the migration dynamics in Greece, as opposed to Turkey, which is like around 30% who wanted to live in a European country. So in both countries, there's this huge demand for living in another country, actually, not in the countries that they are born, but more in Greece, interestingly.
Which is also linked, of course, with the low trust to institutions and sort of, let's say...
And also ability to move, I guess, because, I mean, if you are a Greek person, you can move anywhere within the European Union, so that makes it a possibility, but the migration possibilities for Turkey is much more limited, so maybe related to that as well.
Thank you very much, Evan, for raising this important point. This brings us to the end of our webinar. I would like to thank very much our speakers, Senem Aydin-Düzgit, Evren Balta, Evangelos Aretes, and Dimitar Bechev for their comments. And stay tuned, the program on Turkey at ELIAMEP at IPC will hopefully continue their collaboration with more important, interesting projects covering Greek-Turkish relations and possibly beyond that, because there are a lot of issues that concern Greece and Turkey in the region. And the cooperation between think tanks and the academic community is also a very important area of further cooperation development among the two countries, between the two countries. So thank you very much indeed, and have a great day.